Well, thanks so much. And first of all, thank you for inviting me here. Thank you for listening to me today. And it's a fantastic day outside, so I really appreciate this. And with all what's going on at the moment with not just the beautiful weather, but also the coronavirus and all what's shaping our daily news, then it's really, really nice to be talking to you. So I just wanted to follow the fantastic presentation that we've just had, because what I want to talk to you about today is what I see the future looking like when we talk about artificial intelligence, big data, all these words that we've seen day in, day out in the newspapers. And I just wanted to really challenge some of the premises, some of the concepts that we read in the newspapers and on TV, we see on TV, and also ask for your ideas and around, what do you think are the challenges that we've got ahead? Now, I love technology. I really do. I really like it. It's great. It's fantastic. I do use Facebook. I do use Amazon. And I'm terrible. I know. Boomy. I know. I do like technology. I do like having a smartphone. I do like all the things that technology allows us to do. And I do like the fantastic work that you are doing right now to make sure that we are able to detect breast cancer before women have to find it in a mammography or even later, which is much worse. And I love all the benefits that technology is bringing us. And I love it so much that I really want technology to benefit everyone. And this is my starting point. And I want to start by saying to you that I'm concerned that over the last few years, we've seen the absolute best of tech, but we've also seen the absolute worst of technology. So when I talk about the best, I am really fascinated by what is happening. I'm really fascinated by the fact that we can use big data to understand patterns in society, to understand where people may feel lonely, depressed, or even attempted suicide. I'm excited by the fact that we can use big data to understand where people may be at risk in their personal life. Or I'm excited by the idea that we can use big data and new technology to improve our defenses in cybercrime, or we can use this kind of technology to reduce mortality in traffic accidents, or by really looking at patterns of behavior in our society. That's great. It's good. Who would say no to that? But I'm also very concerned about some of the uses of technology over the last few years, and I'll start with one, facial recognition. Facial recognition uses artificial intelligence. And the idea of being watched all the time, to me, in my mind, changes the way that we inhabit our public spaces. Stops people from going to places and stops us from being ourselves in the most important thing that we have, which is our public spaces and what we hold dearest together which is our communities. Facial recognition is big in the public domain at the moment. And we've seen places like San Francisco decided to actually ban it from the street. Funnily enough, the place where all this technology is created, is developed, is the places where the people there saying, hold on a second, this is too intrusive, and we've got to stop it. It reminds me where I was growing up in Italy, and Berlusconi was the prime minister, and because he knew how terrible television was, he decided to send his kids to school where there was no TV. So it's very much that kind of similar situation at the time. So in San Francisco, they said, we're going to ban it because it's really changing the way that we live together. But it's not just facial recognition. If I say Cambridge Analytica, the idea that when we navigate our online spaces, we are tracked all the time, and it's like having a supercomputer pointed at us, looking at what we do, telling us what to look at, telling us what we're going to be in 10, 15, and 20 years from then, and at the same time, telling us even who we have to vote for. And if we think of the Cambridge Analytical stuff, that was rather terrifying. The idea that we can use big data online to understand and to make correlations between things. So, for example, the Cambridge Analytica team, if they thought, for example, that you were worried, you really like animals, and you were like, oh yes, I mean, she's an animal lover. She loves animals, she loves cats, she loves animals, she really is into this. Then they would just target you with adverts showing how Europe is in favor of killing animals and doesn't care about animal care. This is called behavioral advertising. This is called tracking of our taste, of our online journeys, and this is quite profound in terms of its consequences. What happens, for example, if on Facebook I'm able to understand whether somebody is entering a manic crisis? I can use this information for the good. But what happens if I'm a gambling company and I start to target the people who are about to enter a manic crisis because I want to sell them gambling adverts? Because I know that people who are about to enter a manic crisis are more likely to spend money. So these are the things that have been happening over the last few years that have really shown that technology can be great, but it can also be quite challenging and disturbing. And what happens if I decide to replace human resources with a machine? And I say, well, you know what? Instead of having human beings screening CVs, I want to use a machine. I will train this machine, and I will ask them to identify the best candidates for the job. It's happening. There are companies doing this exactly. Then something can happen like what happened in Amazon, where Amazon said, we are deploying this system to recruit employees. But this system was only choosing male CVs. And what happens if I want to send out adverts and use algorithmic-based advertising to send out adverts, job adverts to people? Then something like what happens on Facebook will come up, which is that jobs that pay less are advertised to women, and jobs that pay more are advertised to men. And what happens if I start using these machines, these algorithms, in a criminal justice system? And what happens is what happens with Compass in the US, where two people put in prison, one is black and one is white, regardless of the crime committed, the black person always had a higher rate of recidivism. And what happens if I use these systems in deciding whether somebody can be granted bail or not, whether somebody can be hired or not, whether somebody can be interviewed or not? And in facial recognition, if I look at somebody's face, sentiment, the way they move their lips, the way they move their nose during an interview, to decide whether they're good employees or not. So this is what's been happening over the last few years in the space. And this is what I'm concerned about. Not because I don't want technology, but because I want some serious discussions about where we are going and what problems we are trying to solve. So one thing that we should start with is artificial intelligence uses data which is out there in the community today. It's historic data. We've got loads and loads of data. It's connected everywhere. You say you may not have a smartphone, But even if you don't have a smartphone, you are likely to use your card when you go shopping, or you are likely to have a smart meter at home. Data is collected absolutely everywhere, and it's going to be more and more like that. So we have all this huge amount of data out there that we can use. And what is happening is that these systems, they use historic data, which is the data that is out there now. But data is not neutral. It's not. Data is the result and the outcome of a decision for this data to be collected. Somebody has made the decision that your data is collecting and yours isn't. Somebody has made a decision that some data can be elevated and some data can be cancelled, deleted, destroyed. Look, for example, at research for strokes. One of the reasons why we had really little knowledge about women was because data about them wasn't collected. Think about endometriosis. We're only recently talking about endometriosis in the public space. So data is not neutral. The collection of data is the outcome of hierarchies in society. If you're black and live in Hackney, your data will be collected by a stop and search in a much higher way than somebody from another skin color. So data is not the neutral thing that people talk about. And this is really important, and I really want people to challenge this. When people say, oh, but data is neutral. No, it's not. No, it's not. Data really represents the hierarchies of the world that we live in. So if we use algorithms, because, for example, we want to find and we want to recruit an engineer, right? So we ingest all this data in this machine and we say we want to recruit an engineer. Then, of course, these machines will replicate what we've taught this machine to do. But in a world where engineers are still mostly men, what these machines are going to do is to just replicate that behavior. Why is Facebook advertising higher paid jobs to men? Not because it's evil, because it cannot be otherwise, because men are paid more than women. Still. The reason why I'm saying all this is because we really have to start understanding, first of all, the data is not neutral, and second of all, the technology is not neutral either. Every piece of technology, every algorithm, every piece of AI system that we create is a technological product, but is also very much of a political and social product. Because we decide which data goes in it, we define the parameters within their system. I always give an example, which can be a little bit dramatic, but listen to this. If I want to recruit somebody, and I have an office which is based in central London or in central Paris, and my criteria to recruit somebody is to say that that person comes to work on time in the morning, at 8 o'clock. That is my criteria. So what I do is I go and look at my employees, what are my employees that come to time at 8 o'clock in the morning, they're never late. And then I train this machine and I get this machine and say, find me people with the same characteristics, because I only want to recruit people who come to work at 8 o'clock. But if my office is in central London, who are the people who are going to be able to come to work at 8 o'clock? The single mom with 3 kids having to drop the kids off school, or the single white man in his 30s who is able to get a flat near central London? Why am I saying this? Because bias comes in from all sorts of different ways. A postcode. If you use postcode within a system, postcodes tells a lot about people. A postcode will tell you where somebody is from, their ethnicity, how much money they make, sometimes even their sexual orientation. So the reason why we created an organization called Women Leading Artificial Intelligence is because of this reason, because what we are seeing is we don't want artificial intelligence to bring back all the things that we have been trying to fight against for a long, long time as women. And not just as women, as wider diversity. This is one thing. The other thing about these systems is the lack of accountability that we're seeing right now. And actually, this is something that really, really scares me. People say that they're worried about the idea that all these systems, AI could be regulated. And I agree, because regulating AI probably is like regulating mathematics. It's difficult. But we've got to do something about this before it's too late. If you think about the general data protection regulation, yeah, which has come too late, after years and years of discussions, too late. In the meantime, look at what the internet has become. The architecture of persuasion, of online manipulation that our internet has become. We've intervened too late. We've let it just become something which is so very different from what originally we wanted the internet to be for, which was to connect us. And now it's become a really strange place with a lot of micro-targeting, behavioral advertising, this echo chamber where we only listen to what we believe in. YouTube, where if you watch something about being a vegetarian, then you're served a video about how to become a vegan. It's constantly, you have to be more extremist than you've been before. And Zeynep Tufekci, which is an amazing academic at the MIT, studied all these issues about YouTube. I mean, it's worth a look, what is YouTube doing at the moment? So we've intervened a little bit too late. So with AI, one of the things that I'm a little bit concerned is, how do we intervene to make sure that we are able to mitigate some of these harms and some of these risks? The lack of accountability is something that really scares me. Because a lot of these systems, they've been introduced, and we don't really know that they're being introduced. So things like, what if we are replacing humans with making decisions about housing? Instead of having a human deciding whether you get houses or not, it become a machine making the decision. Or, for example, what is the benefits or issuing, for example, our big organizations like DWP, HMRC. The problem is that a lot of the systems, this automation is happening everywhere. And the problem is that what's happening in the US, for example, is called automation of poverty. And this is because a lot of these decisions are started to be made by machines. And it's very difficult for people to challenge them because they don't know that they're made by machines. And in systems like the US, people don't know that they can challenge them. And therefore, what is happening is that exclusion and automation are going hand in hand. So what's happening in many cities in the US is that people are being cut out of services, cut out of benefits, because they can't challenge the decisions made by machines. Now, we have in Europe, and in the UK, we have a great piece of legislation on this, which is the data protection regulation. It basically says that every decision which is made by a machine without human intervention needs to be clear to the user. So you need to see that that decision is not being made by a human, but it's made by a machine. And at the same time, you need to be able and to be in the position to challenge the decision and to say, I want a human review of that decision. And this is really important, not because humans are not biased. Of course they're biased. Of course we can be racist, of course. But once all this gets automated, it spirals into a level which is completely different from what we're used to now. It goes on a completely different level because it gets automated and coded into the decisions that we make on a daily basis. And there are discussions that we're having on whether legislation like anti-discrimination legislation, whether human rights legislation is enough to protect us in the age of machines. And probably we do need to do a proper fitness test to see whether this current legislation is enough in the age we live in. I've been working a lot on the idea of discrimination law, which works on protected characteristics. But the problem with discrimination in AI is that it's very difficult to detect it. It's very difficult to understand where the discrimination happens, if it happens. And sometimes discrimination happens in very different ways, because we are discriminated because we live in a certain place or because it doesn't fall under the protected characteristics of current legislation. Tricky, very tricky one. So automated decisions, that's a big area of work. The other big area around AI is around, do we want to understand how this system works? This is called explainability. These systems are very complex. Now, if I catch a plane, I don't go on the plane, open the engine, and look at how the engine works, because I don't know how the engine would work. I'm not trained. But I know that somebody has been looking at the engine and has been looking at the due diligence that the company has been placing in building the plane. Who is looking at the due diligence of AI systems? We've got no laws at the moment. Do they get a stamp? Do we have labels, labeling schemes? I don't know. That's all open to discussions. But how do we know that systems have been following due diligence? They've been looking at the data that's gone in. And this is very important. Think, for example, if you are a hospital and you use a particular algorithm, okay? The way that that particular system has been trained is absolutely important. Because if I train my algorithm with data coming from the community near here, that particular algorithm will latch onto local data. But if I use it somewhere else, that may have a huge impact on the community, because maybe that community has got different characteristics than the community where the algorithm has been trained. And when we are at a time where, because of financial difficulties, because of financial constraints, a lot of NHS organizations, but also public sector organizations, local government, whose finances is basically reduced to the bone, I am concerned that people may just purchase products off the shelf without the proper due diligence to make sure that these products are fit for purpose. So who is doing this fit for purpose exercise? Now, we've got something good in the UK, which is called the Information Commissioner, led by a woman, let's say on International Women's Day, Elizabeth Denham. And she's just put out something really good, which is an auditing framework for algorithms. So basically, what she said is, I can audit algorithms, but if you want to use algorithms in healthcare, in decision-making, in the tax system, whatever you like, you need to follow this guidance. Whether you follow this particular guidance or whether you produce something which is similar, but these are the principles that you need to follow. And that's really encouraging, and it's happening. But I want to move on from this and say, yes, we need to look at how these systems are explained, and our explainability is a very difficult concept. Because if I say to you, can you explain how that machine has got to that decision? Most of us wouldn't be able to. What, will we get access to 20-page code? Who will be able to read, to understand it, unless you are trained in that particular subject? So explainability is very much contextual. If I'm a doctor, and I go to my doctor and I say to them, because I've got a problem, I don't really care much about the system in itself. The only thing that I want to know is that it's efficient and it works. But if I'm a doctor, I need to know how the decision has been made. So explainability is very much contextual. It depends on who you are. And these are all very complicated concepts that we really need to understand and say, how do we explain these things? How do we, sometimes when you do an application online for a system, I'm sure you've done it, you put your date of birth, your salary and earnings and whatever, and then the application can be denied. And then what you do is that you try and change the details to see if the result will be different. Do we need something like this for algorithms? Is it something that we need? It's called counterfactual explanation. You change the facts and you see whether you get a result. And this could be one of the many ways, not perfect, to challenge the outcome of the decisions to see whether, for example, they're biased or not. One of the many ways. So this is part of the complexity around all this. The other issue, and the last one I want to talk about before I close, is around fairness. There's a lot of talk about the bias, but I wanted to say something in relation to that. We said at the beginning, algorithms are biased because they are ingested the data of society today, right? So they couldn't be otherwise. Unless we make a proactive choice to intervene on the parameters that we choose to achieve a different outcome. So for example, if I am an employer and I want to recruit 50% women and 50% men through an algorithm, I have to make an active choice to manipulate reality as it is now. So achieving fairness is not a mathematical objective, it's a political one, a social one. So the idea that these machines will automatically get us a better world is rubbish. What will get us a better world is the way that we interpret these things and what we want to do as human beings. But over the last few months, we've been talking a lot about ethics of artificial intelligence. Ethics. And I've been challenging a lot this concept of ethics. Whose ethics are we talking about? Is that the ethics of the Silicon Valley and Menlo Park, or is it the ethics of... So we've had huge discussions about all this. And there is one thing which is absolutely important in my view. AI is transforming the way that we live. And let us be very clear about it. It's not Terminator. It's not artificial general intelligence, which is something far, far away. It's not that. It's what AI is doing right now that is what we should be worrying about, in my view. Is the online-driven digital advertising? Is the unaccountable decisions made by organizations over things like lending, access to housing, things that can really change the way that we live and our access to opportunities. But these are things that we must talk about. It's facial recognition. These are things that we need to talk about as society. And this is where I'm worried about. What I'm worried about is the decisions about what to use, what to do in artificial intelligence that are not made by us. And I think this is where it becomes scary, because we want technology to work for everybody. And I want people to be involved in the decisions around the way that we use it. And I want to close with one thing, which is my greatest passion, which is privacy. A lot of the things that we do and we are able to do right now, they happen because of the huge amount of data that we collect. When I went into privacy law years ago, I went into privacy law because I thought that there is nothing more collective and more public than a piece of personal information. Because the data that we have, the data that we hold, is not just about information that we have about ourselves, but it's also us, what constitutes us as human beings. What I like on Facebook, what I buy at the shop, how much electricity I consume, or the color of my hair, is not just something that I own, but it defines me. It's my taste, it's my personality. And it's the most precious thing that we have is our personal data, but it's also the most important that we have so that we can improve healthcare. So we do need a new social pact between us in the age of big data and redefine the concept of privacy as we've seen it so far. Because if we continue to believe that it's our individual data versus the benefit of society, as sometimes I still see it happening in the privacy debates, I don't think we're going to harness the value of technology. But if, on the contrary, we decide what that value of technology is as a society and what data we want to put into the system to achieve that, that is a completely new proposition. And we may be able to override this privacy paradox we're all in, where we're all scared about privacy, but we all give away our data without thinking, because this is a situation we're in. So we are into this paradox. And if we want to harness the benefit of this technology, if we want to really understand, create and identify new antibiotics, if we want to really identify diseases way before that they manifest, we really need to be able to redefine the relationship between us, our data, and the contribution we make to society. And this is a huge debate, a huge debate. I went into privacy law very much on a very individualistic way of privacy. I went into privacy law when I was living in the US because there was a toilet and there was a camera put on a toilet. And I was like, no, that's not right. Of course it's not. But then moving forward, I started to see there's something that's got to give in this debate. That we need to rethink the way that we see privacy in a new relationship between us and that common good that we should achieve with technology. But that is the debate that we need to have around it all together. And one thing I would urge us today to do is really to bring all these discussions around data, big data, artificial intelligence to the kitchen table. It can't just be a few people deciding what this is for. AI is going to reshape our world. If anything, it's going to reshape the global dynamics between China and the US and where is Europe and Britain. So we can't just leave it to a few to discuss what technology is for. That's a debate for us. And this is what I really urge everybody to do. Thank you.